research group at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Manchester Metropolitan University. And as part of what we do a lot of different things. But one of the things that we do is a working group called AI Literacies, which we have set up last year to bring together various aspects of how we think about the emerging AI technologies and general AI in particular through critical lens. So some of the things that we do is we move from what is known as AI literacy to critical AI literacy, which is asking a range of critical literacy questions and critical AI literacy questions. And we really do it through a range of different disciplines in arts, humanities, and social sciences. We're looking at creative practices, we're looking at creative thinking, and we really welcome many external conversations which are growing and multiplying really quickly around what does it mean to have AI literacy today with technology that is developing really, really quickly, faster than we're able to comprehend it? So our series of events bring together speakers from DISC and external guests, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today Irene Picton from the National Literacy Trust. We had the privilege to talk to Irene last year when we started these events around AI literacy and visual AI literacy in particular, when we were looking at how visual generative AI is figuring in how we do our politics, society, learning, and everyday life. And today, Irene will be talking about specifically the research that has taken place at the National Literacy Trust around the use of generative AI in education and to support literacy. And just before I pass it on to Irene, to remind everyone that this particular talk, as well as other previous talks that we have recorded, are available on our YouTube channel. Please do come listen to them afterwards if you want to visit them again, and follow us there. All the exciting stuff that we do will be shared there. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and pass on to Irene. Irene, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adi. I'm just going to see if I can share this window with everybody. Hopefully you can see that. Can I have a thumbs up if yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, well, yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Irene Picton. I'm a Senior Research Manager at the National Literacy Trust. And in case you've not come across us yet, we're a UK-based literacy charity, and our aim is to empower people with the literacy skills that they need to succeed in life. And we do that through all sorts of things, from working directly in communities, all the way from Dundee to Cornwall. We do training and conferences for educators. We have a policy and campaigning arm. And all of our work is underpinned by our research. Much of my own research as part of the team considers children and young people's experiences of literacy in a digital world, including our recently published reports exploring young people and teachers' use of generative AI to support literacy. And this is a topic that we're quite naturally interested in, because the ability of these new tools to write and read in a human-like manner seems like it might have an impact on what it means to be literate in the digital age. So let's see if I can move my slides along. There we go, marvellous. So I'm going to start with a comment that a teacher shared with us that neatly illustrates the kind of impact that we'd perhaps rather it didn't have. As you can see, one teacher told us about a pupil who informed them that they wouldn't be needing to learn how to write now, because that would be taken care of by a computer by the time they finished school. And in a way, you can't blame children who perhaps share these views because of all of the hype around the transformative power of AI. You can understand how they're picking up those messages, but of course, this is not the whole story. So yes, we're fortunate at the Literacy Trust to have a well-established annual survey, which this year reached more than 115,000 children aged 5 to 18 in schools across the UK. So it's very large scale, but it is a convenient sample. So it's open to any UK school. They receive a report on their pupils' responses as a thank you for taking part. They can compare their school's responses with the national findings. And our data now goes back 20 years. There's lots I could say about the trends that we've seen over that time. Just working on a report on digital reading over that time. So that's my next project. But today I'm just going to focus on the last few years. since we started asking questions on generative AI, which we did just after ChatGPT-3 was launched in late 2022. So we focus our AI questions on young people aged 13 to 18. We had about 60,000 young people in that age group in our overall sample this year, but most of the findings I'm going to talk about will focus on the subgroup who told us they used generative AI, although the group who don't are probably equally fascinating and something that I'm looking at in some separate research. But anyway, our findings from young people were complemented by responses from nearly 3,000 teachers who took part in the accompanying teacher survey, which included questions about their own use of AI and perceptions about their pupils' use as well. So we're increasingly aware, I think, of the impact of these now not so new tools on young people of college or university age. But I think looking at the generation coming up is also really important, especially while there's an increasing amount of guidance and attention paid to teachers from the Department of Education, for example, but little formal or official curricular guidance, at least for young people themselves. So these kinds of surveys with young people can inform us in this vacuum of what young people are actually choosing to do, if anything, with AI. And I just wanted to share a few examples of other really excellent reports focusing on young people's experiences in this area. For context, in case of interest, so some really good contributions out there from Internet Matters, the Turing Institute, Common Sense Media and Ofcom. They all contribute to the wider context from their own perspectives and interests, some of which do link quite strongly to our own, especially in relation to trust and critical evaluation of AI outputs, which Ofcom ask about. Our main focus in our work at the moment is on using AI to support reading and writing, but not just whether, but also how young people use these tools and to what extent their use is critical and reflective. So that critical AI literacy that Addy was talking about. So in terms of headline stats, and again, this is just for context, one thing that was interesting to us this year was that we saw something of a consolidation of AI use. In 2025, we had 2 in 3 young people in our age group 13 to 18 who told us they used Gen AI, but this was actually a bit of a drop on the year before, because 3 in 4 told us they'd used it the year before. And then we looked at what was driving this decrease. We could see it was mainly age group. So more young people on the older end of our age spectrum, our 16 to 18s, were using it compared with the younger end. But otherwise, it was quite similar across gender and socioeconomic background. But I will say that Ofcom research and others have found, they found a similar decrease in overall use, but they do often note lower use in young people from lower income backgrounds, and that's something we don't tend to see so clearly in our own data. However, of those who did use it this year, more were using it weekly, almost half, compared with 3 in 10 who used it weekly in 2024. And of the weekly users, it was again more the older teens, but also very slightly more boys and young people from higher income backgrounds. So this suggests to us that some groups are becoming more confident or adept at using AI tools in 2025. The most popular uses were for curiosity, so to ask questions and for help with homework, and then also for entertainment and fun. That's the top 3. Slightly more girls than boys told us that they used it for help with homework, and more boys than girls were using it to create images. Older teens, however, they were more likely to say they used it for ideas and for homework support than younger teens, but that perhaps just reflects the increasing demands of higher educational stages. So on to the literacy elements. What we were most interested in was whether and how, as I say, young people use these tools to support aspects of the writing and reading processes. So as this graph shows, of those who did use Gen AI to support writing, most actually told us they were using it for quite basic purposes, like improving their vocabulary, checking their spelling, essentially things you can probably do with most word processing programs already. But we did also see a decent percentage who were using it for more interactive or creative purposes, like getting feedback on their writing or turning their ideas into a story. It's about 1 in 5 doing those things. And then we looked at this through the lens of writing confidence and enjoyment. And the biggest difference is actually related to existing levels of writing enjoyment, much more so than confidence. And I think when I was putting together the questions for this survey, I wondered if we'd see the least confident or the least keen writers using Gen AI to essentially avoid writing or avoid the aspects of writing that they disliked. But as you can see in this graph, the dark blue bar is young people who enjoyed writing. The green is those who didn't enjoy writing, and more of those who enjoyed writing said they were using AI to support almost all aspects of the writing process, suggesting that keen writers use these tools to enrich a practice that they already enjoyed, rather than less keen writers using it to help them with things they'd rather not do or struggled with, for example. But at the same time, while young people who didn't enjoy writing were most likely to say that they used AI for those more basic purposes, finding better words to use or checking spelling, 1 in 5 had also asked for feedback on how their writing could be better. So there's a suggestion of some potential for AI to support this group too. This piece of research, which you might be familiar with, came out towards the end of my data analysis period, and it gave me some real pause for thought in some of my reactions to my findings. So briefly, the gist was that researchers found fewer brain connections lighting up in a subgroup of study participants who were asked to use Gen AI as the first step of an essay writing process, compared with a group asked to use the good old internet or just their own brains. And while this study I don't think has yet been peer reviewed, and the final sample size, I should say, is quite small, 18 in the final focus group, and is with higher achieving adults rather than young people, I felt the findings maybe had something to say about the potential impact of using Gen AI to support writing at all, but more so the sense that when you used AI might be almost as important as whether you used AI. So essentially, what I took away, this may be a misunderstanding, but using it later in the process was better than using it earlier. And I think this might be especially the case for the adolescent, the still developing brain. And I'm hoping somebody might reproduce this study with younger age groups, somebody who's got access to a brain scanner, which we don't currently have at the Literacy Trust. Moving on to reading now. Fewer young people told us they'd use Gen AI to support aspects of reading. This was also the case for teachers, as I'm going to come on to. Of those who did use it to support reading, again, it was the quite basic purposes that seemed to be most popular, so maybe explaining word meanings. But we did see 1 in 3 were using it, for example, to summarise texts. That particular activity was more popular with your older age groups, as was using it to suggest different interpretations of a text, possibly again just reflecting where they are in their educational stage. And as with writing, again, we saw that more young people told us, who enjoyed reading, told us that they'd used AI to support most aspects of reading, but particularly pronounced differences in things like asking for reading recommendations. That's towards the bottom there. You can see 3 times as many of those who enjoyed reading asked for reading recommendations, which I think is a shame, because quite possibly if it was any good at reading recommendations, it might help the least keen readers. So on the topic of reading, commentators have described AI as mainly a tool for writing, and that is very much borne out in our research so far. But anybody who's used a tool like Google Notebook LM to summarise a very long paper for them, maybe to help you decide if it needs a closer read, will know it can cut down the time that you might otherwise spend, trawling through papers. And I think over coming months and years, the awareness of tools like this is just going to keep growing. And we already see this in our findings for our teacher survey. But AI reading is perhaps not really reading as we know it. And I'm really looking forward to this book coming out in January from expert Naomi Barron. I might even get Google Notebook to summarise it for me, just for the irony. Right. We also asked young people, not just, as I say, about whether they used AI, but how they used AI tools and to what extent their use was critical or reflective. So we put a series of statements to them, both this year and last year, and asked them about their agreement. And as you can see, a fairly reasonable number of AI users in this age group told us they did add their own thoughts to the outputs. About half did so both last year and this year. And just slightly fewer felt confident about writing a good prompt, enabling them to use AI efficiently, which is important when you think about the environmental impacts and so on, as well as, as just generally using tools effectively. About 2 in 5 young people agreed that using AI can stop us thinking for ourselves. And again, that's quite steady year on year. But I've just picked out a stat at the bottom to highlight, which is the percentage of young people who said they just copied AI outputs. We saw that increase over the last year, going up from 1 in 5 in 2024 to 1 in 4 in 2025, which is a real concern for us because we don't want that necessarily. And again, when we look at critical and reflective use through the lens of existing reading and writing enjoyment levels, reading enjoyment levels were the real big differences. We can see that more young people who are already enthusiastic readers, but also writers, reported engaging more deeply with AI, adding their own thoughts and checking outputs in case they're wrong compared to their peers who didn't enjoy reading. And I think when taken together with the insights relating to the more creative or interactive use of Gen AI tools in the most keen writers, we can see traditional literacy engagement is associated with overall more reflective interactions with AI, at least in this sample. And this reminded me of something that I heard on the Today programme on Radio 4 recently. It was an author of a book called Curious. I think he's called Ian Leslie. And he was suggesting that one aspect of Gen AI is that it could enable the more curious person to feed that curiosity, but that the converse might also be true. It wouldn't suddenly make incurious young people curious, which I think was maybe what I was hoping to see. And in our wider surveys, many children, young people have told us that they're motivated to read at all, to learn new words, to learn new things, to learn about their interests, all curiosity, to learn about other people, to learn about the wider world, as well as for other reasons like escapism and well-being. And I wonder if what we're seeing here is perhaps that the curious young person, often but not always, of course, might also be a reader, just as a way of, learning things. And they're keen to add their own thoughts from their wider knowledge, and will likely have more of a foundational contextual awareness to prompt them to question or look further into AI outputs. Those are just some idle thoughts, can I just say? I haven't confirmed that in any way. But our earlier research has found that literacy and critical digital literacy skills are linked. So this slide here, these findings weren't necessarily surprising to me, but it is one that we are keen to explore. These findings rather are ones we're keen to explore further, because it would seem to emphasise the value of promoting traditional literacy skills and engagement as a way to enable young people to really thrive in the digital world and in relation to newer forms of literacy. So just to finish off this section, we also asked young people to agree or disagree with a series of statements designed to sort of touch very slightly on some of the wider societal concerns about AI. And as you can see, depending on your perspective, a reasonable number agreed that even when we have AI, it's important to learn how to write. 2 in 3 agreed, with that, and only 8.2% disagreed, at least. And for me, one interesting thing was that while half of young people did feel that AI could support them to learn or understand things when their parents or teachers weren't around, only about 1 in 6 told us that using AI tools for writing or reading helped them to feel more independent, suggesting a sort of greater sense of reliance when using it to support literacy than when using it to support learning. I'm going to be really brief now. I'm just going to pick out a couple of key findings from the teacher survey to sort of triangulate those findings. One thing to say is that the percentage of teachers in our survey using Gen AI has doubled in the last 2 years, and the gap between primary and secondary teachers is narrowing definitely as well, but slightly fewer teachers still used it overall when compared with the young people that they teach. If you remember, it was about 2 in 3, 13 to 18s telling us they used AI, and that compares with 3 in 5 teachers. And overall, it seems teachers are increasingly aware of how you can use AI, to support you with your writing resources, adapting content, generating comprehension tests. And fewer use it to support reading, but we have seen an increase in use for summarising documents or reports. But yeah, we see these numbers sort of ticking upwards from teachers in terms of using Gen AI to support their own writing and reading. But their concerns about their students using it are also increasing at the same time. So a growing number of teachers tell us they're worried about their pupils using generative AI. About half were concerned about the impact on young people's engagement with learning. But even more, 2 in 3 believe that AI could decrease the perceived value of developing writing skills. And I think this comment from a teacher summarises overall concerns in this area quite neatly. This came through from lots of teachers, that we're becoming, not just students, as they say, we are all becoming too reliant maybe on the support offered by Gen AI, and that can have a negative impact on our reading comprehension and on our writing abilities. And I mean, this threatens literacy at its core in some ways, because comprehension, understanding and meaning making from text is the ultimate purpose of reading. And being able to write, to use writing as a tool for thinking, for expression, feels maybe like it's quite a big part of what it is to be human. So I think this is something we need to be on the alert about, and engaging critically with AI tools is perhaps one way of preserving these aspects of literacy, because if anything, it requires stronger writing skills to interact effectively with the most common AI platforms, and deeper, more careful reading of AI outputs to evaluate their value, if you like, for want of a better word, or their substance. So perhaps unsurprisingly, a high number of teachers agreed that their students should be taught to engage critically with AI, nearly 9 in 10. But of course, pupils, students can't do this unless teachers themselves know how to do this. And at the time of the survey, just 3 in 10 teachers told us they'd had some training from their school, and half had said they had to find their own support or training on how to use AI. And I find that really interesting. I think the interactions between the more structural and systemic aspects of learning about AI. So, for example, the government line or multi-academy trusts, how they might present AI as an opportunity or a threat, and how that interacts with teachers' own personalities and belief systems, their life experiences, their confidence, and in turn, how that relates to students' interactions with AI, including their literacy engagement. I just find all those interactions really interesting. It's something we may come back to in the discussion. But for now, just to summarise the gist of the research, I would say the findings showed that more young people who were already engaged with literacy were using Gen AI in the more interactive, creative, critical ways, as I say, to enrich practices they already enjoy. But this is happening against this kind of growing concern around how AI is affecting how literacy is valued and enacted. So I would say more thought needs to be given to promoting the value of developing independent writing skills, of exploring information critically for oneself, and generally AI use that supports rather than supplants thinking. And I know I'm not saying anything new there. This is reflected in many of the wider debates. And I'm really enjoying some of the recent papers and op-eds and what have you in this topic area, for example, around the potential for AI to extend and expand our thinking. I love things like that. I love all the positive stuff. But equally, we have this counter argument: are AI outputs the single-use plastic of the mind? I've also heard them called ultra processed information. And I think the idea of associating AI with plastic has been picked up in academic thought pieces too. There's an example there. That paper sort of explores how Gen AI can act both as a democratizing educational tool, but also a pollutant of existing knowledge systems. So kind of like plastic, it's human created, it's ubiquitous, it has good uses, but also potentially toxic implications. And I think that's where we move to our discussion. I have some other thoughts on critical AI literacy, but we might come to that. So I shall wait to see. Okay. Should I stop sharing, or should I leave this on, Addy? Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it on and then
Great.
open to discussion. So I'm going to let everyone have a few seconds to gather their thoughts, and I'll start with a question and then we'll open up to the floor.
Mm.
So first of all, thank you so much. This is really fascinating, a bit disturbing, a bit exciting, a bit of mixture of everything, and also kind of hearing you talking about the latest findings versus what you've been looking at over the last few years is really interesting because we see how quickly things develop. So I guess my first question is placing AI literacy or placing the use of AI to support literacy and everyday learning in the broader context of critical digital literacy, which you have mentioned so many times. And I'm thinking here more about things like misinformation. So there is the question such as, do I check whether the information AI is giving me is incorrect? That's the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of it. Do I
Mm,
fact check the tiny homework help that I was given from
yeah.
ChatGPT? All the way to AI-driven misinformation more broadly and the kind of insane growth of fake news to
Mm.
which young people are particularly susceptible. So I wonder what your thoughts are on this topic.
Thank you. Thanks, Addie. I mean, all yeah, very close to my heart. So I've just got this slide here where I've sort of tried to summarize some of my thoughts in, but we've been looking at this area since I would say 2016, 2017 at the National Literacy Trust. And I think literacy, critical digital literacy, even critical AI literacy, they're all very closely connected. Literacy isn't a static concept, it's a dynamic activity. It's always informed by technological, social, cultural, academic forces. And I think that's reflected in the academic literature, the critical turns in literacy studies that kind of move literacy from being considered as just print alphabetic skills, if you like, to culturally, socially, historically situated or embedded practice. And I think when we have these new and disruptive developments in communication technology, like AI, literacy skills have to adapt. You need different, often more complex literacy skills to engage effectively and reflectively in your new information environment. So yeah, as I say, we started looking at this about 2016, 17, and that was around the time the US elections, the Brexit referendum got us all wondering to what extent young people were being taught or supported to learn the kinds of literacy skills they needed to navigate the online world and all that comes with it, the misinformation and so on. No, not even any AI at that time. There was enough swirling around. And as part of that work, it became clear that the theories of critical literacy, Paulo Freire will know, back in the 70s, were highly relevant to the digital age. They encouraged readers or consumers of text, images, content to take an active rather than a passive role in that activity, and essentially to question purported authority. And ideally, that would lead to positive social action. So, critical digital literacy brought those theories up to date by considering how power operates in digital contexts, and considering not just like sources and reliability of online information, although that is absolutely, foundational, but the wider ecosystem within which that content exists and where the power resides, who owns the main communication tools, what data they're trained on, all of those things. So there's a natural line from this to critical AI literacy. So you can make a distinction between functional AI literacy and critical AI literacy in the same way as you can between digital literacy and critical digital literacy. So AI literacies might focus more on like operational, instrumental AI use, but critical AI literacy should include understanding AI within systems of power and rhetoric, basically. So that can include everything from resistance to positive social action through AI. And this does need some really basic skills. And I'm talking about this in terms of, how we support this younger generation. We need some awareness of the basics of how models are trained, how they perpetuate stereotypes, biases. I know I'm obviously preaching to converted here. We all know this, but also some knowledge. Firstly, that you should check outputs for mistakes and misinformation, because I still hear a lot of the time from young people that they think everything is true that's generated by AI. So just knowledge that you should be checking that. But I'm so aware that this is becoming increasingly difficult. We used to say, find out if the person or the organization who produced the content, find out about them. And does it appear elsewhere? Has it been fact checked and so on? But I would love to hear, if we have any fact checkers among us today, how they're approaching the increasing difficulty of these usual procedures that we went through prior to AI, but also awareness, I would say, of the ethical, environmental, cognitive impacts of AI. that can inform better decision making around whether, when, if to use AI tools. And I think what we're aiming for is that culminating in a selective, effective and reflective, apologies for the for the rhyme, approach. Obviously though, and I said this in the visual AI session, I remember, I think this is all moot, there's a lot of chat around this kind of thing, but if there's no motivation to actually translate this into knowledge, this knowledge and awareness into behaviour, then yeah, it's all moot. We know from media and news literacy research that value for media literacy, or VML, that's a fundamental factor in adolescents' news literacy engagement. So yeah, young people need to see the issues that we're all talking about, all these concerns. They need to see them as relevant to them in a way that resonates with their own lives. And the way I've seen this done in media literacy is by co-creating resources between industry professionals and young people themselves, and then training young people to train other young people. So there are ways of doing this. I'm sure other people have got other approaches too, but I just wanted to finish on a sort of practical potential way forward.
Thanks, Irene. This is incredibly hopeful, I would say, given that when you mentioned teachers and pupils, and teachers don't necessarily understand AI as well, parents don't necessarily understand it as well, and nor do pupils. And, we're coming to fact checking at the time of AI from Googling everything and having very little fact checking. So the younger generation today thinks that asking, hey, Google, and getting the information is actually the given truth rather than fact checking what they're finding there. So this is definitely food for thought. So there's one more question for me, and then I'm going to stop the recording and open it to the floor. You've touched on it quite a lot already, but I would like to, wrap this up with this question of, where are we going with this? What is the future? I guess, what is the future of literacy more broadly? So are we living in these really transitional times, kind of akin to the invention of print or the democratizing of reading and writing, moving from only a very small group of educated people were able to read and write, and kind of moving to everyone can. So are we in the process of a fundamental shift of what we even mean by basic literacy, and where do you think we're heading?
Whoops, I've actually, so we honestly didn't prepare this, did we, Addie? We have just chatted this morning. It's so funny, but I've literally got this terrible timeline that I wheel out in these times. I always have it in my back pocket. Absolutely, yeah. The nature of literacy is always changing. So with apologies for this ghastly timeline, I keep meaning to tidy it up, but I never quite get around to it. But the gist of it is that literacy has always had to adapt, evolve to suit the time. So there we have, yeah, written communication, we have printed books, we have all the things we've just mentioned. And I think, as part of this, there's always this period of disruption and redistribution of power, which feels very uncomfortable for everybody, while we think, what's the good things, what are the bad things? And I must confess, if you haven't noticed, I'm a bit of a tech optimist, and I always have to pull myself down and listen to all the black hat people and think, no, calm down, it's not going to transform literacy as we know it. But you could see it, if you were a tech optimist, as a further step, AI, a further step in the democratization of access to information. Yeah, framing it, you can frame it in lots of ways, but yeah, being positive, following similar seismic events like the invention of writing or portable book, printing press, public libraries, the internet, even much maligned social media, it arguably, allows an easier, more conversational interface with a vast amount of information, albeit of varying quality, that we have access to digitally. I think we've, all of us who've seen the dawn of the internet and then Google making it that much easier to navigate, a bit like a sort of digital librarian for you, you'll need to have a look at this and so on. The unwieldy size of the internet and the information on it, I can see why a tool like this that sort of pre-digests, it kind of analyzes and synthesizes a bit on your behalf. I can see how that might be, if not a positive thing, a practical thing, perhaps. I think I heard somebody say that on the radio as well. I absorbed these views and I think they were mine, but no, I'm pretty sure it's somebody else's idea. But of course, if we go back to library times, it was relatively straightforward to grasp who had written and published something, its provenance and so on. And even though that was probably quite questionable in some ways, you know, who owned the printing presses, who had time to be an author, who judged who could be an author and could be published and so on. I think my concern there is that it's often more obscure. The provenance is more obscure in the age of AI, and it's getting more obscure by the day. The sources are quite often cited, but as we know, sometimes they perpetuate existing biases, sometimes they're made up. And whether they're the best sources and why they were chosen, it is increasingly difficult to know. So that's a concern that I have. And then in terms of, this is my last bit, in terms of kind of how it's affecting literacy, I just love these provocations that I've put in the bar on the left. Hamilton et al. Came out with this brilliant, it's not inconceivable that many of us might even lose the ability to read and write because these skills for many would serve no purpose. If that does come to pass, you know, if we no longer need reading and writing skills, then technically that means that literacy, at least in terms of decoding and, you know, forming groups of letters, is no longer an issue at all. So all of us in the Literacy Trust can go home. But realistically, I think the second scenario, the one by McKnight, is close to reality. So this is where we're using the tools, maybe like you might consult another team member, you might like how they're, you know, question that they have about something complements yours. They might add ideas that you hadn't considered, but you might also think, yeah, I'm not sure about that input, or that suggestion's not so good. So it's a kind of about working together and co-creativity. And then I've got a bunch of questions that I would ask myself as well, but I'm going to maybe stop sharing at this point because I'd love to hear what other people have to say. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Irene. I suggest that we stop the recording and then we can have an actual conversation without people necessarily worrying. Okay, so the recording has ended, and now let's